Telesales, the opening is the most important. Okay. It's more important than anything else, right? Why? It's crazy, right? 30 seconds of an opening. How is that more important than pre-qualifying, closing, or presenting? Well, because if you don't open well, then you're never going to get the opportunity to see if your close is good or bad, right? You're never going to get the opportunity to have the opportunity to sell, right? So the point is you should be spending your time really ironing out the smoothness and your ability to do the first 30 seconds of the telesales call. Okay. Likewise for you face-to-face agents, you got to get good at this too. If you're setting appointments or door knocking, it's pretty much the same thing, is getting into the presentation. And this is a very important component to the opening. We assume that this is Irene. We don't allow for the opportunity for the client to take control. Ultimately, that's the problem we're trying to grapple with. Who is in control? We want to be in control, right? Because then we can direct the presentation to the end that we want, which is a closed policy. If the client takes control, then that may not necessarily happen. It usually doesn't. The presentation goes awry. We're not giving the information in the process that we normally are accustomed to, and we usually don't get the sale. So one of the things we want to limit is the opportunity for the client to take control. Okay, very, very important. So notice when we ask questions, many times, again, in certain parts of the presentations, when we ask questions, we risk losing control. Not that we're against questions, quite the opposite. But what we're against is an untimely questioning, if you will. And that is predominantly in the beginning of the sales presentation in this opening section. If we start asking like, you said that your favorite hobby was fishing, right? Then we are allowing them, the prospect, to speak and then to potentially ask us a question back and then find us out of control. Because when the client speaks, especially asking a question, they're like, what is this about? I'm not interested, or making a statement sometimes, then we're back on our heels in the defensive posture. And that's when the opportunity to lose control really manifests. So what's the solution? You stop asking questions prematurely. Notice there's a difference. If I say, you said that your favorite hobby is gardening, that almost sounds, and it is, sounds like it sounds like I'm asking the person to confirm that. Thus, what am I doing? I'm handing control over to the prospect. As opposed to saying you said that your favorite hobby is gardening. That's more flat line. The inflection isn't up, right? And so what happens is it doesn't cause the prospect to feel like they need to answer because you're making statements, not asking questions, okay? Again, what's the point of this? The point is to avoid giving control prematurely, okay? I mean, we don't really want to give control ever really in the call. But the thing is this is the point when your prospects want to qualify you. They know that you're a sales pitch or you're trying to pitch them on something and that it may take a bunch of time and it may be in an uncomfortable position. You're a stranger, therefore you're a threat. And so they're going to be on their heels and trying to get you off the phone. So one of the benefits of using Facebook leads is we get favorite hobbies. And if we're going to try to build some rapport that is contextual and significant to the client, we try to focus on the hobby they've indicated as being important, right? So gardening is what as JR should be talking about. The how are you doing? It's not that it's wrong. It's just not as effective as saying, so what's your favorite? What do you do in the garden? Do you grow flowers? Do you, do herbs or whatever? You ask some kind of relative question about gardening and make sure it's client centric, right? You don't want to ask that question and then start talking about how much you love gardening for the next minute, right? Does that make sense? We want to follow up with more questions related about their favorite hobby, that of which is related to them, right? So we want to stay on them, ask them questions, flatter them, show them we're interested in them so that their guard is let down and they feel comfortable proceeding. Okay, that's in essence the summary of what we're trying to accomplish with rapport building is getting them to like us, right? And the way you get people to like you is to ask them questions, not talk about yourself. Okay. What we prefer as a rule is depth of rapport, not breadth, right? Breadth would be, so where are you from? South Africa. Oh, that's cool. So are you retired or working? I'm retired. That's awesome. So what do you do for fun? Nothing. That's cool. That's breadth, right? It's very surface level. We're not really learning it. We're learning facts about the client, but we're not learning about their story, right? If you learn about people's story, that is more emotional. There's more significance behind that. and it's not just chit chat, right? So that's why I would rather you just ask about gardening or whatever, you know. It doesn't really have to be the favorite hobby. We prefer it because that's just the easy way in. But if it's about the dogs, I'd prefer, instead of asking about where you're from, to then instead ask about, oh, I don't know, what kind of dogs you got, what's it like, what are they like? I don't know, follow up stuff, whatever would be relevant in the time and the responses, right? So I'd rather have a series of questions that go into depth about dogs or gardening than the breadth. Does that all make sense? This is very, very, very important. Why? Because most people don't go in depth. They just ask questions. And this is part of the problem with the rapport building side, is to be too canned about rapport will come off as just chit chat, as insincere. And I don't think this did at all, JR. But what I'm saying is this is the hardest thing to actually script in a canned fashion, because you have to ask a question and you have to think on your feet really hard here, right? Because we don't have no clue how they're going to respond about gardening, and we have no clue, therefore, what we're going to say back, right? So this requires you to think on your feet and respond, and really have a sincere interest in the prospect, and to ask them a couple of questions.